Councilmembers, if you go to your page 6, we'll go to public hearings and meeting. Item 41, amending the Code of Ordinances of the City of Baton Rouge and Parish of East Baton Rouge, Title 15, so as to add Chapter 7, Landlord Retaliation Prohibited, by Councilwoman Darlene Collins Lewis. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a public hearing. We speak on item 41. We have a lot of people who do not want to speak that are in favor. Ashley, you want to read those first, and we'll get those out the way. Who do wish not to speak but are in favor?
The following people are in favor but do not wish to speak. Brandy Cross, Dorothy Knighton, Derek Goss, Kanisha Morgan, Keisha Robinson, Ebony Mingo, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Ennis, Deborah Green, Kevin Wilkinson, Evelyn Parkland, Corinne Parker, Ursuline Neff, Sandra McManus, Brian Long, Mr. and Mrs. Vince Perry, Donald Montgomery, Leona Cagle, Derek Miner, Helen Knight, Alvin Willis, Thomas Rhimes, Adam Biggs, Charles Sanders, Herbert Cavalier, Reba Rhimes, Bessie Allen, Brent Oquin, Barbara Oquin, Melva Davis, Alma Stewart, Peggy Sauls, John Scarl, Ebony Emile, Eureka Davidson, Stephen Clark, Nicole Johnson, Roxanne Welch, Aletha Miner, John Veazey, Nancy Hillman, Jade Chandler, Ingrid Mateus, Susan Bacallis, Keisha Smith, Elizabeth Powers, Jerry Stark, Sandra Bongiovanni, Jose Wing, Kiara Wing, Angela Chamberlain, Susan Email. All of those are in favor and do not wish to speak.
Okay, I have on wishing to speak is Linda Williams. Do you wish to speak?
Hi, this is my first time here, and to me it is an honor and a privilege to be here. I'm here with Alexander Harvey Apartments, and Capital Realtors is the realtor group that's over our complex, and I am the residential president with the tenants, and we have been harassed by management over there, and a lot of evictions has been happening over there also. And I've been to the Attorney General office. I've been practically everywhere. And we need help. We need help because somebody going to get hurt. And the tenants, I have a few here with me, about 5 or 6 of them here with me, that management have pointed her fingers in the fire marshal's mother's face, and he stopped that from happening any further, and she was threatened that she would be evicted if she tell anybody. We are being charged for refrigerators, stoves, cabinets, you name it. Tenants are being charged, and they are going in their accounts and everything. So And of course, yeah, she's backing up and trying to backtrack and get herself straight. Now she knew I was coming over here, and she put out a request telling all tenants about pest control. We have a resident that has been bitten by a black spider. She is every day have to go to Baton Rouge General for wound care. She have had surgery, and we don't know if she's going to lose her leg. Has she visited that tenant yet? She have not sympathized or went to see who was bitten. But attorney is involved in this situation. She wrote out that pest control come every month. This is a lie. Okay, they don't come every month. They come out when we call and we say we need them right away. That's when they're coming out. She backtracking. And also other things are going on that I don't want to be liable to say, but eventually God going to handle that one too.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up is Laquita Bowers.
I'm back again. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, members of the council. Thank you for the opportunity to once again speak on this item today. I am a resident of District 10 and also a staff member with the Foundation for Louisiana. The Foundation for Louisiana works alongside residents to create and promote community-driven solutions, and we believe this approach will make Louisiana stronger. For this reason, in February 2018, the FFL trained 14 Baton Rouge residents working on housing issues, on advocacy and organizing skills and strategies at our lead training. The Tenant Protection Ordinance was one of many ideas that came out of this group. Some of the members are here today, and we want to thank them for their contributions and commitment. Over the last year, the lead housing group have been working on galvanizing public support to pass the ordinance, which will provide needed protections against retaliatory eviction when a tenant files a code violation complaint and a city inspector verifies. I just want to give you a snapshot of what we've been doing here in East Baton Rouge Parish. We surveyed over 100 people to help us inform our strategy. The results showed that half lived in rentals with serious health or safety violations. We also called over 500 people to ask them to contact their council members in support of the ordinance. The residents spoke in favor of the ordinance, but whether they were a homeowner or a renter. But we also learned that renters are afraid to tell their stories for fear of retaliation. I just want to go back and say, moreover, that the Baton Rouge code officials have also stated that tenants are often afraid to come forward and report code violations. So some will say Louisiana already has laws in place that protect both tenant and landlord, but under our current laws, there is no protection to prevent a landlord from retaliating unless the landlord is uninformed enough to provide a written notice saying they are evicting the tenant because they asked for a repair. So given the challenges of our city with blight, I think most residents are very supportive of having codes in the books to ensure properties are maintained in safe and habitable conditions. So this ordinance is simply designed to ensure that residents can call and inform their landlords or the city of violations of the code we've already passed without fear of retaliation. So I just want to say, if this doesn't solve it, then what does?
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for your time. I'm asking you to vote yes on the Tenant Protection Ordinance.
We had John Veazey. I know there was a sheet that you didn't want to speak. Did you want to speak, John Veazey?
He couldn't be here, so he made a statement as a letter.
Good afternoon. Today I am reading a statement written by Attorney John G. Veazey. in support of the Tenant Protection Ordinance. In the winter of 2017-2018, I was requested, along with Krista Bordelon, to go out to Alexander Harvey Apartments in North Baton Rouge due to tenant complaints about thermostat issues that resulted in excessively cold temperatures in units occupied by elderly and or disabled tenants. Over 3 days, it became clear that there were a host of issues that directly impacted the health and welfare of the tenants of Alexander Harvey. The primary and most common issue was that the thermostats had limits set on them and were generally placed in kitchens in the units, which was generally the warmest parts of the units. This resulted in extremely dangerous and freezing conditions in the units. Elderly tenants were doing things like sleeping on their couches where it was warmer, or using opened running ovens to attempt to raise the temperatures in their units. Furthermore, virtually every unit was found to have some sort of maintenance issues, often creating dangerous conditions that had gone neglected. Many of these defects violated East Baton Rouge's housing codes, and many tenants expressed their fear of complaining either to Alexander Harvey Management or the city for fear of eviction or either adverse consequences. The Tenant Protection Ordinance is a small step toward remedying substandard living conditions like in Alexander Harvey for Baton Rouge's poorest and most vulnerable tenants by giving them protection against retaliation for insisting on their rights under state law and local ordinance to live in safe, clean, and habitable quarters. It also levels the playing field between landlords and property owners who comply with all legal requirements. I encourage the East Baton Rouge Parish Council to pass the Tenant Protection Ordinance. Sincerely, John G. Veazey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Krista Bordelon.
Hi, thank you. I had sent out an email with probably a longer statement than 3 minutes to all of you, so I did want to kind of read a little bit from that statement and then go above and beyond. In December of 2017, I was called out to Alexander Harvey apartment complex for what was being reported was a heating issue. When we went in with a temp gun in the units, it was in the 20s and 30s in these units. Several of the residents got pneumonia. One man had a stroke on his floor and laid there all night. Many of these people are disabled, so when their caregivers leave at night, they're stuck in their bed and unable to move until the next morning. I worked with 2 other people from the community, and as soon as we went in and began collecting maintenance reports, the eviction notices started coming in for the tenants that were making complaints, to the point where even management was threatening to keep us off of the property and have us arrested for coming on the property. So when I was invited to be a part of the lead team with the Foundation for Louisiana, when we discussed housing issues, my heart was really in it for tenants, especially as a tenant myself, as a survivor of domestic violence, having to move every single year because of issues in different units all across East Baton Rouge in every single district. Picking up my kids, having to move them every single year while still trying to remain safe and stable for them is just unsustainable. And so part of the statement that I had sent to you was talking about how property maintenance and safe housing impacts every aspect of our community. And it really does. It impacts the surrounding property values. It can either cause or prevent blight. It impacts the presence of crime in these areas. It has a direct correlation to health outcomes, can either ensure or deny stable education opportunities for families with children. It impacts the rates of domestic violence and the safe outcomes in situations of violence. It can either cause or prevent homelessness, and it directly impacts current and future neighborhood and community development and plays a large role in attracting new businesses to EBR. When we sat down and we were talking about all the different things that we could do, this was literally the very basic minimum step. We already have codes in place stating what landlords have to do for this city. And to ensure that we have good business practices in Louisiana and specifically in Baton Rouge, the first step is to ensure that people feel safe enough to call the city to report a code violation, which is already on the books. And if they are attempted to be evicted retaliatorily for filing about that we protect them. Because the number one thing we can do as a city is to help people self-advocate, and that will save us resources and will keep them safe. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Levita Tuff.
Good afternoon. My name is Levita Tuff, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Power Coalition of Equity and Justice. We are a statewide coalition of organizations who are committed to fighting policies that affect Louisiana families. And one of those policies that we want to fight for is the Tenant Protection Ordinance. As someone who grew up with a teenage mother and a drug dealer father, I understood what it was like to have unstable, unclean, unsafe housing until the age of 14. And my mother told me when she sent me off to college that she wanted me to become a better woman than she was, and she wanted me to use my voice the way she didn't because she was too afraid to speak out about the conditions we were living in. I remember not having heat, I remember not having air, and I remember using my mother as a blanket to protect me during the winters. And she never spoke up and she never said anything. But I kept that promise to my mother when I came to the University of New Orleans and when I went to Southern's Law School. And I continue to keep that promise to my mother as I sit with families from across Baton Rouge who talk to me about the housing conditions in which they have to deal with. And it reminds me of that little girl who was sitting there in the house using her mother as a blanket. And that's not okay, and it's inhumane. And as a 32-year-old woman who had the ability to go on and move on after having unstable housing until the age of 14, I can only imagine what greater things I could have done if I had just felt safer and felt like I could use my voice at a younger age and an earlier age. And what I want to do is I want to continue to support policies that protect children who are living in unsafe and unclean housing, mold issues, issues with the ceiling, not having AC, not having heat, all of these things that every human being should have and should see as a necessity. But they don't have that. And so when we hear their stories and we share their stories when we go to places like DC, where I was last week for the National Skills Coalition training, we talk to people about what we're experiencing here in Louisiana. And it's embarrassing to say that I live in Baton Rouge in District 8, and I hear stories from across Baton Rouge of kids in 2019 not having safe and clean housing. So I beg you, the stories don't end here. They go all across the country of what we're not doing to protect our folks. So I beg you to please support the Tenant Protection Ordinance.
Thank you, ma'am. Hannah Adams.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Hannah Adams. I'm a staff attorney in the housing unit at Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. And Council Member Collins Lewis invited me to come here today and provide information to the council about the issue of substandard rental housing and tenant retaliation. SLLS, as I'm sure you know, is the largest civil legal aid provider in Louisiana. We provide free civil legal aid to low-income families. Our Baton Rouge office is located at 715 St. Ferdinand Street, and we've served over 10,000 Baton Rouge families since 2011. Our offices are ground zero for the issues addressed by this ordinance. Our low-income clients face an epidemic of unsafe and unhealthy rental housing conditions. Many of our clients in Baton Rouge completely lack adequate plumbing facilities, and others lack a suitable and sanitary kitchen in which to cook meals for their families. The problem is, current state law and local code enforcement cannot adequately protect vulnerable tenants from hazardous living conditions, for the simple reason that our clients are afraid to complain about these living conditions and call the appropriate authorities to remedy them. When our clients attempt to assert their rights, they are often met with retaliation. I'll give you a couple examples from my work. One of my elderly clients lived in an apartment for over a decade that fell into extreme disrepair. In addition to serious leakage and mold, the plumbing deteriorated to the point where she could not obtain water service at her house. Her landlord refused to make necessary repairs despite repeated notice, and she could not afford to move. Something that comes up a lot is, well, why don't these people just move? Well, she couldn't afford to. She's an elderly person living on a fixed income. Finally, she called code enforcement, who cited the landlord for numerous violations. Shortly thereafter, she received an eviction notice. The landlord is now making repairs, but unfortunately, my client will not get to benefit from them. In another case, My client, who is a single mother with disabilities, called code enforcement after her 14-year-old daughter fell through an open hole in her floor. Shortly thereafter, she too received an eviction notice. So again, the result of these retaliatory evictions is homelessness and extreme financial strain on families that are already struggling. And these are just two examples of how slumlords take advantage of vulnerable tenants who try to reach out for help. The proposed ordinance creates a desperately needed deterrent for negligent landlords and would ensure that renters feel safe to report serious violations of the city code. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions about our work.
Thank you, ma'am. Kashana Hill.
Thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I'm Kashana.
It doesn't happen very often.
I appreciate that. Thank you. My name is Kashana Hill, and I serve as Executive Director of the Greater New Orleans Fair Housing Action Center. I'm very pleased to be here today. Despite the name, we do serve communities all across the state of Louisiana, and we've been working in Baton Rouge for years now, including providing support to organizations on the front lines of recovery following the 2016 floods. I'm here today to stand up for two very basic universal values. Everyone deserves a safe and healthy home, and people who reach out for help should not be punished for doing so. Unfortunately, our current laws do not reflect these values. 170,000 people live in rental homes in East Baton Rouge Parish, and a recent survey showed that half have lived in rental units with serious health or safety violations like leaky roofs, collapsing ceilings, mold, and rats. I'm sure that many of you are aware of problem apartment buildings in your communities. We know that state and local law requires landlords to provide rentals in safe and habitable conditions, but clearly these laws are not enough. A big part of the problem is that when renters reach out for help, as we just heard from Ms. Adams, there are no laws to prevent their landlord from retaliating against them or by filing for eviction. In many cities with serious substandard housing problems, they have passed proactive systems where all rental units undergo basic health and safety inspections, just like restaurants or any other businesses. That is the best practice to truly eradicate blighted apartments and protect renters from retaliation. However, what Councilmember Collins Lewis has proposed here is a much lower bar for landlords. It does not require any inspections or repairs. It simply ensures that people can report violations of the city codes that are already on the books without fear of facing a retaliatory eviction. In 2017, this council unanimously passed an update to the property maintenance code. With that vote, you showed that you believe everyone deserves a home that is safe. But these codes are only as good as your ability to enforce them. If renters are afraid of retaliatory evictions, it will be the rare call you receive notifying you of fire hazards or of other violations. So I ask you all to make good on your vote from last year. When negligent landlords don't take care of a property, they threaten the health and safety of their tenants and erode the quality of neighborhoods. I ask that you ensure that the city will actually hear from renters in these properties so that you can enforce existing laws and keep Baton Rouge moving in the right direction. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. In favor, who wish not to speak, I don't know if your name was called, was Rosa Herron. Next to speak is Herb Gomez.
I'm Herb Gomez, 14101 Perkins Road, Baton Rouge, representing the Greater Baton Rouge Association of Realtors. As it stands right now, I've got about 6 or 7 drafts of this particular ordinance. As it stands on, I'm not sure which one we're talking about, but if it was original from the other day, we were opposed to it. We have issues with the rebuttable presumption, which flips the legal system upside down, where you now have to prove yourself innocent. You have to prove a negative. So, and that's, I'll be brief, and that's the biggest issue we have with it. There are a number of other issues. We've had meetings with Donna and with Councilman Welsh, and have agreed that we will sit down with them and try to improve this to make it a little more easily explained to the landlords and the tenants, and work out something. And we will do that if it's defeated, or even if it's defeated today. If it's deferred, we will make that commitment also. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Steve Myers.
Thank you, Steve Myers. I'm not speaking on behalf of any formal organization. I appreciate you bringing the issue up because it's actually heartbreaking to see the problems we have in Baton Rouge housing. I see it all over town, and it doesn't really affect me except, in my heart. But when I look at this law, and one of the things Herb said is I'm not sure what you would actually be voting on today, frankly. The last thing I saw when I pulled yesterday was something that was introduced in December, but then I saw a version that I call the Welsh version that had some comments, and I wrote my comments, because I wrote my comments. So as a lawyer, I'm looking at this saying, oh my gosh, there's just so many issues and problems. So, my understanding is that if you have public hearing and something is deferred and it's brought up again, you don't maybe need to have a public hearing the second time, because I won't have enough time to go through all of these issues. But I think there's a difference between retaliation, which no one really probably supports, and the repair issue, which is covered quite extensively in the law. And I'm in agreement with a lot of what people say. There's some bad landlords. But I'll look at this and say, I'm going to be put out of business if it gets around with social media and Twitter and goes viral that all you need is a, quote, code violation in order to complain to the landlord, in order to get a freeze, if you will, on the landlord, changing tenants, whatever it may be. And this is the point I bring out. I mean, I could go through line by line. I don't know what good faith really is, but when it refers to Section 8.1, I assume that's Section 8.1 of the Code of Ordinances, which refers to the building codes, of which there are 4, the IBC, the IRC, the IEBC, the IPMC. If you can't find something wrong with a house by looking at those 4 codes, then you've got a problem. So, do we mean that if there is an outlet that is, I'll use the term grandfathered, because the law doesn't say anything about grandfathered conditions. And if you have an outlet that was code at the time, but now is not up to the current code, does that come under this? Will that be something that a tenant could complain about, saying it's not up to code? Child-proof, outlets, they're best, but I've had houses in different areas of town, and I was telling the story earlier that
if you can start wrapping it up, please.
That it costs the same amount essentially put a roof on when you can get $600 a month rent as it does when you can get $1,600. I'm actually contrary to favor a lot, but I really think you need to pull this back and that we need to spend a little more detail.
Thank you. Michelle Rabelais.
Hi there, my name is Michelle, and I've worked in the real estate industry for 26 years. I've specialized in property management, and I currently work as a property manager. I also own rental property in Baton Rouge. I'm a licensed real estate agent, and I'm married to a real estate broker. So I know a little bit about real estate. I'm here today to voice my opposition to the tenant protection proposed ordinance. Landlords and property managers are already held to some pretty high accountability standards. Any owner with 4 or more rental units is held accountable by fair housing laws, which protects retaliation, landlords from retaliation. And the Louisiana Attorney General is responsible for the complaint process. If a rental property for these renters that are low income, if they are on a housing authority, the housing authority inspects the property once a year to ensure that the property is in good condition. And believe me, my rental property is on Section 8, and they make me make repairs. Not only that, if the property has a government-funded loan, a REAC inspection is done on an ongoing basis to ensure that those landlords are keeping up their property. And even if it isn't on a REAC loan, it's on a conventional loan, the bank is going to ensure that that property is being well kept and maintained. So there are many processes already in place to hold landlords and property managers accountable for keeping up their property. As one of our jobs as a property management or real estate professionals is accountability, to hold residents accountable, we have to send out letters at times making people accountable to their contracts. Last year I did that. I had a patio that had a Christmas tree on it, and it was May. The young lady came into my office after receiving one letter, and she basically, we had a sit-down civil conversation. She left. She proceeded into my reception area. Thereafter, she attempted to attack me, stating I was attempting to harass her by asking her to follow her contract. This happens more often than you think. I was locked in my office waiting for police to come while I dialed 911. I'm lucky to have gotten out of that okay. My sister's a property manager as well. She has these instances that occur on her property. It's not uncommon that she goes out after sending people letters or addressing violations. Maybe they're making noise. Maybe they're doing things that they shouldn't. They haven't paid their rent. They have an NSF. And people put nails into her tires. She's had to have her tires fixed. Evictions are not granted without the judge looking at both sides of the case.
If you could please wrap it up, please.
So take that into consideration, because a judge will not grant eviction unless it is proper. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Jeffrey Welch. Welsh.
Hi. I'm here today as a part of the Greater Baton Rouge Association of Realtors, and I'm not here to oppose the concept of the ordinance as we discussed in your office, but the process. And I had understood that there was going to be more of a definition of process when we spoke, and so I would just lodge my opposition to the way that the ordinance is constructed at this time and say that we're very interested in protecting tenants and going back to the drawing board and seeing what we can define in the ordinance so that we have more of a process or an understanding of what the process would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, opposed but wishes not to speak is Deanne Bryson. Also, as a public hearing, wish to speak on item 41. Anyone wish to speak on item 41? Yes. If you give your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. My name is Maxwell Cherdulo with the Greater New Orleans Fair Housing Action Center. So, council members, I just want to clarify some pieces in some of the opposition that we heard from landlords here and go through some of those so that you all have the facts as you're making this decision. So first, the Fair Housing Act does not cover retaliation against tenants claiming code violations. It only covers tenants who make a discrimination claim. So let's be clear about that. That does not exist in the law. Some folks have said that this would also make it impossible to evict a tenant who lodges any sort of complaint, even if they cause the damage to the apartment. And I just want to be really clear about exactly what this does. If a tenant does damage to a rental unit, state law and pretty much every lease makes it abundantly clear that that's a violation of the lease and a valid reason for eviction. This ordinance doesn't change that. If a tenant violates a lease, whether that's by not paying rent, punching a hole in the wall, disturbing the neighbors, that's always a valid reason to evict. And this ordinance simply prevents retaliation against renters who reach out for help. We've also heard that there's an issue here with repairs and would prevent folks from increasing rent unless they make required repairs. And I also want to be really clear about this. This is specifically concerned with protecting the tenant from retaliation, and retaliation can occur whether a repair is made or not. As an example, if a whistleblower at a bank reports embezzlement and the embezzlement stops, should the bank now be able to fire the whistleblower for reporting the embezzlement? Or should they at least have to find a non-retaliatory reason to fire them? That's really all we're talking about here. That's the very low bar we're setting here, is that it requires that landlords who file for eviction must produce a single legitimate reason for that eviction besides the fact that the tenant recently requested repairs. And this is actually something that is pretty standard practice. In fact, a law professor at LSU recently wrote an article about this in 2015 and did a review of states, and 40-plus states and more municipalities than I have time to name passed laws like this in the 60s and 70s. They've been on the books for 50 years. They have been proved constitutional in federal courts. And so, in fact, what we're talking about here is that rather than this being a radical proposal, What we're really talking about is that Baton Rouge's current laws are radically out of step with the rest of the country. So I just want to make sure you all have the facts about that what we're really talking about is an ordinance that is designed simply to make sure that landlords can find any other non-retaliatory reason. That is the low bar we're talking about. And really, I think, I've met with many of these landlords. I don't think this law actually applies to them. This is a slumlord ordinance. This is an anti-slumlord ordinance. The folks who are up here speaking, I'm not worried about them. I think they're very easily going to be able to find a non-retaliatory reason to evict if that's why they're moving towards eviction. So I thank you for giving me the time, and I hope those facts are helpful to you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to speak on item 41, public hearing. Yes, ma'am. Give your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Pamela Toops. I live at 7814 North Jefferson Place Boulevard, Unit A. And I have listened with great interest to everyone's comments here today. And I do understand the horrific conditions under which some people live, and I'm sad for that. But I live in the Bocage area of Jefferson Highway, and I'm supposed to live in a good place. I had to rent mine sight unseen because I was in Memphis, and I was trying to get my job wrapped up there, get down here right after the flood. So suddenly the rents went up inordinately, and I got down here, and I didn't get the place I was told I would get. I didn't get wood floors. I didn't get clean walls. I didn't get crown molding. Crown molding will not make or break my life. My carpet is so filthy, I don't think it's been changed in 10 years. It has ripples. It has spots. So it really doesn't matter where you live. Your property manager is responsible. I have holes in my ceiling from intrusion from upstairs. I have mold under my carpet from intrusion from my living room, my kitchen. I have leaks in my kitchen. I have dead bugs on my kitchen ceiling. Now, they won't remove them, but they will paint over them. So it doesn't matter where you live. The absolute neglect of property managers in Baton Rouge is horrible. And I agree with this lady whose name I didn't understand you pronounced correctly. But the bar is set low if all we're working on is trying to keep people from wanting to evict you. Their solution to my complaints is to offer me an early out on my rent on my apartment with no penalty. I want to move, but I want to move when I buy a house. I don't want to jump apartments. And I have offered to take my furniture out and let them remove the carpet and replace it. They will not do it. I have asked them if they would let me just remove the carpet. That sanitary concrete is much better for me to live on than this carpet. Won't let me do that either. They can't agree to that. My microwave melted down 3 months ago. It might get changed tomorrow. So there needs to be a higher bar. I agree with her. This is a step in the right direction, perhaps, but I'm not sure where your codes are listed. I actually found out about this on TV in November for December and then called the other day. But your codes are not easily found, but your property managers across the board from Bocage down are derelict, and we do need someone coming in. My apartment wouldn't pass. There's mold, there's rot. My windows are falling out. I had one replaced when it literally fell out onto the earth, and I had to duct tape. So I agree with this, and I think we need to go a step further and be a little more.
Thank you, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, the public hearing, we speak on item 41. Seeing none, the public hearing is closed. Councilwoman Freiberg.
First of all, I'd like to make a motion to defer this item.
Got a motion by Councilwoman Freiberg to defer for how long?
Till the next meeting.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Second. Is there a second? By Watson. Okay, Councilwoman Freiberg.
I think that we all, maybe not all, but certainly the majority of the council believes this is something we need to do. Right now, we're still tweaking language. As late as 3:30 this afternoon, the meeting I was in, we were still looking at language in the draft. We were just passed another draft. I don't believe in passing something the night I receive a final draft. So I'd like 2 weeks to look at this. I appreciate the realtors meeting with us and expressing their concerns. I certainly want to thank the Foundation for Louisiana for bringing this to our attention, and particularly to Donna for shepherding this through the process. I was very appreciative of the meeting I was invited to recently that she had in North Baton Rouge to listen to the folks who are most concerned about this. There's no doubt we have some bad players in this arena and that we need to do something, but we want to make sure we do the right thing and we don't have any consequences that we weren't expecting because of the language we allowed to remain in the ordinance. So for that reason, I would encourage the council to defer this for 2 weeks.
Okay, we had a motion by Councilwoman Freiberg to defer for 2 weeks, second by Watson. Next is Councilman Welch.
Thank you. Steve, that's the last time I just fire something off without going in it so it doesn't get called the Welch version. Quite honestly, what it was is that, whenever I looked at it, there were some things that I think that we can work together to get something that is a workable situation for both tenants and for landlords. The biggest issues that I saw, other than the rebuttable presumption and things like that, and just language and what happens whenever you have somebody. Whenever there's a code violation it makes it unlivable, where do you go from there? What happens there? And there's a lot of other things that that I think that where it comes from is from a good place. I mean, tenants should have the ability to make complaints without having retaliation in the sense of, look, you don't like it, you can get out. Because that's not right either. And so I think that if we work, I don't know that 2 weeks is enough time to really look at it. That's just me, because I really want to work with Donna. I really want to work with the parish attorney's office. I want to work with the realtors, and I want to work with the foundation to find something to where we can all live with it, that have real identifiable goals on both ends that doesn't take advantage of either side, and I think we can work to that end. So,
Councilwoman Collins Lewis.
First, I want to say thanks to everyone that came out, either in support or in opposition of. I think we did have a good conversation, and this has gone back and forth. And then I think this is our 9th draft that we're actually working on. So I can understand the confusion. Trey did reach out and send some information or some things that he wanted to see changed in the ordinance. And so Courtney and I did meet again. I didn't even know we were meeting today. But again, I want to say thanks for the support. I am okay with deferring it for the next 2 weeks because if we refer it for the next meeting, I will not probably be in attendance at that meeting. But No, I don't, because I know that I'm not going to be here in 4 weeks at that meeting. So, if we can get this worked out, I'm open to meet with anyone else. We did have a good conversation with the Board of Realtors, and I think someone was there from the Apartment Association on the ordinance. We listened to so many different reasons as to why this shouldn't be, and again, the people that were at the table today, the people that are in support or in opposition, these are not the people that this ordinance is meant to attack. It's not an attack at all. Because if you're a good landlord and you're doing what you're supposed to do with your property and you're fixing code violations, it will not become an issue for you. But when we walk around the community, and the last lady that spoke sent pictures of hers, and I think I sent them around to Trey, and I can pass them around to the other council members. And the property that started for me was on Tishan, where the residents were living there in such dire conditions till it was just uninhabitable for an animal to even live in. But people, again, want to know why people don't move, because they can't afford to go anywhere else. That's just the bottom line. But it doesn't mean that they don't want decent, safe, and sanitary housing. That's not ever going to be the issue. And so if we continue to look at this and tweak it, then that's fine. But again, we need to do something where tenants feel safe enough to call. The only reason the property that is in 311 system and an inspector went out on this property in Melrose East is because they called me and I called it in. So if I got to go around this city, if this ordinance doesn't get passed on a daily basis and turn properties in and put them into the system, that's what I'm going to do. because it's not fair for residents to have to live in conditions like the ones that they're living in. And the other part about it, it's wrong for landlords or property owners to make money off of people living in a dump. It's just not right. It's not right. And so we need to do something about it. And I know Matt and Tyra have been working on a lot of blight issues. We have a lot of blight around our city, and a lot of these properties that people are living in are blighted properties and need to be torn down and condemned. I've dealt with Brandywine. I've been on the council for 11 years. I inherited Brandywine. Finally, hopefully, in the name of Jesus, before I leave the council, Brandywine will be realized and be reinvigorated or whatever they're going to do with it. But, you know, it's just not right for people to have to live in the conditions that they live in and then be afraid to say something about it. And some people say, well, why are they afraid? If you haven't ever faced the issue yourself, you have no idea what it's like. If you've ever lived in a condition where a roof over your head is better than none at all, people want to know why people would live in Brandywine, because they don't want to be on the streets. They don't want to be on the streets, but people deserve somewhere clean to live. People talked about, well, what the landlord can't afford to fix their property. If somebody violates the law, we're not going to say there's not enough police officers, so we're just going to let them get away with the crime. That doesn't make sense. We're codes on the books. If you violate the code, there are consequences for violating. If you violate a law, there are consequences for violating the law. You get arrested, you go to jail, whatever the penalty is. So it's the same thing with housing. If there are laws on the books that say that people shouldn't have to live like this, and if it's a violation, we should be enforcing those violations. That's all I'm saying. So I'm good with the motion to defer it for 2 weeks, and I think there's already been the motion's already been made a second. So thank you.
Councilwoman Wicker.
Thank you. I just want to bring up a point. I know that this has been an issue that has been, around for a really long time, and I want to just say this, that I recall in some of the same faces even many years ago when we brought the ordinance up to deal with rental properties, because Baton Rouge is one of the only cities that didn't have any regulations as it related to rental properties. And the same stories that are being told here, the same information that Councilwoman Donna Collins Lewis is bringing up, were some of the horrific stories that years ago when that ordinance was brought up that we talked about, and we know that nothing has been done since that time. And I just remember the council meeting, and we had the support of the Federation of Civic Associations and everybody involved, but there was an advocacy group that was really, really concerned about putting regulations on rental property owners and what that would mean and how that would run them out of business and things of that sort. And I remember even on this council, and Donna at the time had concerns and didn't support that ordinance. And in all fairness to Councilwoman Lewis, she didn't support it because of this concern. She said, I was concerned to put regulations in place that will require rental property owners to fix up their properties because I didn't want to make sure that people didn't have somewhere else to live. So in all fairness to Councilwoman Lewis, she's answering the issue that she had with that ordinance. But in the conversations, we had a meeting, and I want somebody, I guess, from DPW or the parish attorney's office to come, because in that meeting we were told that the issues that the ordinance that we originally brought up that dealt with property owners and owning rental properties and not repairing those properties and still trying to rent them out, which we were talking about was criminal, that's no longer an issue in Baton Rouge, that we have passed laws on the books here in Baton Rouge that regulate rental property. And I just want to know, is that true? And if you can explain that, because the room was packed last time when we talked about putting those in place. I'm asking, attorney or DPW, is somebody here that put it together? And so we were just told in that meeting that the issues that we were trying to bring forth, Carrie, because you were part of that committee that we talked about years ago, trying to get the rental property ordinance done, that's been put in place. Is that true?
What was passed last year was the property maintenance code. That's what you referred to.
Okay.
So that's what gives us, the permit office, code enforcement, the authority to investigate complaints of these occupied structures, go out, make code violations or cite code violations to the property owners.
Okay. And so we still at this point don't have rental requirements. Like if you rent a piece of property, it says that it has to have these particular qualifications. We don't have that in place in Baton Rouge, do we?
Yeah, the code doesn't distinguish between whether it's rental or owned, although most of the complaints that we get are rental properties. It's the tenant that generally reaches out. But sometimes neighbors call on neighbors, and those properties that we investigate may be owner occupied.
Right.
And those are more difficult. Those owners typically aren't going to give us access to the inside to look at,
Okay.
what might be.
So before we passed what we passed previously, we were literally told that if there was a complaint that came, a person was renting a piece of property, it was a slumlord, they refused to fix it up, that if they had that complaint, we didn't have anything in place to make that property owner fix up that property, that literally we had to tell the person, you just have to find somewhere else to live. So based on what we passed, you said that no longer is an issue. We actually have a mechanism in place that if they call and say they're not making repairs, I'm in a slum condition, that we can go out and make that property owner make the repairs.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear about that. Thank you.
Councilwoman Collins Lewis.
Just want to address something else that was said in the audience about housing authority and HUD properties. And I know I've worked for a developer, so I know that HUD is not necessarily a great property management company either. Because I know that a REACT score of 18 with one of the properties that was in my district that I got called about. So, there are rules and regulations in place, but they don't always abide either. Councilwoman Banks just had a property in her district that is a federally funded property that was so deplorable till it was on the news, looked like every day and night. So, again, even if it's a HUD property, I know we can't regulate the federal government. I do understand that. But what we can do, we should do. And that's all I'm saying. Thanks.
Okay, we had a motion to defer for 2 weeks. Councilwoman Fryberg, second by Councilman Watson. Are any objections? Seeing none, item 41 has been deferred for 2 weeks.